Most youth ministry podcasts are made by youth leaders and used to share their ideas on how to engage with the next generation of youth ministry.
Here at the Mountain Sky Conference of the United Methodist Church, we're going straight to young people themselves to find out what they want from the church.
Like the prophets of the Bible, it is our hope that the voices of our young people will help inspire the church to better adapt to serve the now generation.
This is Mountain Sky Prophets.
I'm Court Von Lindern.
And I'm Amanda Daniel.
And you're listening to Mountain Sky Prophets. And on today's episode of Mountain Sky Prophets, Amanda and I actually don't have an interviewee today. We are wrapping up our first season, so season 1 here at Mountain Sky Prophets. And we figured we would just kind of do a general recap together and talk about some of the things that we've learned, speaking to all of our young people thus far. And yeah, I know I've been really struck by all the wisdom, all the stories, all the ideas and creativity that these young people have brought to us. And yeah, I'm going to turn it over to you, Amanda, and I'm just curious, like, what have you learned in this experience? What has stood out to you through this process?
Yeah, thank you, Court. It's been a exciting 7 episodes that we've recorded. It's been so much fun. And like you said, I agree. So much wisdom has come out of these opportunities for us to talk with these youth across our conference. And there's one big thing that struck me, and some other smaller things, but the big thing that has struck me is so many of them mentioned being concerned about the environment. And I think the question was posed to them, what can the church be doing better? And in what areas? And that was one area that they mentioned, that climate change was a concern for them and for their future, and that they desired for the church to be doing more in that area. And that really struck me, I think, mostly because I hadn't put a lot of thought to that myself. And for that generation to be worried about that, I started thinking about my daughter Grace, who's 7 months, and thinking, if this was a concern of the generation now, it would probably be something Grace is going to worry about also when she gets older. And so it's really prompted our household to be more aware of our impact on the environment. We're definitely recycling more, composting, and I'm definitely more aware of what I'm bringing into our house. Is it just junk? Is it sustainable junk? What is it? So that's the big thing that has really struck me. And it was definitely not a concern when I was in school, when I was their age. The other thing that struck me is, it sort of plays into that, is just the way they are so mature and just so concerned about the world. And I just remember being in high school and then into college, I guess I was just a dreamer. My head was in the clouds a lot. I don't know that I was as conscious of everything going on as they were. And Court, I don't know if you would agree there or how you felt growing up.
So I remember growing up and going through high school, and I had some friends who were like fairly engaged in world happenings, a lot more knowledgeable and informed, even just about like the political realm that I was back in high school. But I don't remember any of us being so involved that we were, like organizing protests and things like that. I remember in episode 2, Cassidy talked about the March for Our Lives protests on gun reform and things like that to raise awareness about school shootings and things, and what it's like going to school when you're living in fear of a school shooting happening. And yeah, I remember that was like a thing, like we do like our lockdown drills and things like that, but I don't ever remember it being such a big deal that like we would like have protests. And same thing with stuff related to climate change. We had like our awareness weeks and things like that. And I remember watching Disney Channel, and they would have little like commercial breaks of like, here's all these things that you can do to save energy, like unplug cords that you're not using, or like turn off the lights when you're not in the room. Remember to turn off the water when you're brushing your teeth so it's not running the whole time. So I remember all those small things, but nothing that was like as big as what I feel our young people are facing now. And I agree that they're so like mature and wise and smart. And there's a part of me that is really excited about that. Like, yeah, like our kids are like, they're so knowledgeable. They're like engaged in the world. Like they want to be leaders. They want to be a part of the change that they want to see. And then the other part of me almost, I don't want to say I'm like sad for them, because that's not quite it, but it is a little worrisome that they seem, and I don't want to say that they seem to be so like into this, like they almost have to be, like they are so concerned about their future, understandably. We're talking about climate change and things like that I also like wonder if they're still getting enough time to just be kids and be teenagers. And I know a few of our guests have talked about how hard it is to plan for the future when you don't know what it's going to look like. And the idea of graduating high school, going to college, and getting a job isn't what it used to be. And I think that started to change too when I was starting to exit high school. Just like this idea of like, you go to high school, you go to college, you get a job. Like that's the path, and it works. Like that's the plan that everyone's supposed to do. But now that's not realistic for a lot of people, whether it's because of financial reasons or because they're too concerned about, is there even going to be a future where I have a job? Like what's going to happen to our planet and all these things. So yeah, I agree that all of our young people they're smart. They know what they're talking about. They have voices and leadership skills that I think that I lacked at their age. And then there's a part of me that wishes that they didn't have to have all of that so that they could still like just be teenagers and not have to worry. So I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I have felt that too of, I hope they're still having fun and being able to enjoy being a kid. I know, I think in high school we were probably more worried about tornadoes than we were about some of the things they were about. We did a lot of tornado drills growing up, and I know for me, and I think some people that I talk to regularly are probably tired of hearing this, but since becoming a mom, oh my goodness, my perspective of so many things has changed, and it's both wonderful and horrible at the same time. Because how wonderful is it that I have this new life that I get to raise, and I get to see the things that she'll become. And at the same time, oh my gosh, there's so many terrifying thoughts now that run through my head. And for me, I always possessed empathy, and I felt there were times when I could walk in other people's shoes. But even now, more so, I just my heart hurts now for other mothers in a way that it never did. And I just, listening to these youth talk about their worries, it just breaks my heart in a way, because we don't want them to worry about these things, and it makes me wonder, what should we be doing better, from our end.
Absolutely. And I'm not a parent. I'm not a mom, not a dad, not a parent, not any of that. And so obviously I don't share that same experience and worry by any means, but I imagine coming at it from a perspective as someone who has like worked with other people's kids, whether that's for a week at church camp or a weekend retreat at a lock-in, or just, Wednesday nights during youth group. I imagine in that, like, there has to be a lot of trust for the rest of the world. Like when you, and I know Grace is 7 months old, so she's not necessarily walking out the door doing whatever she wants to quite yet. She's just rolling around playing in her crib.
That's next month.
Yeah, that's next month. Exactly. But when your kids are like at the age where you're dropping them off at daycare or preschool or, anything like that, I imagine there's a lot of trust that has to go into their people and the rest of the world. And I know some of the conversations we've had with our kids, like some of that trust, I think, like just isn't there. Some of that fear that they're dealing with, and there's that fear that they're dealing with, and like they're navigating it and like finding strength and faith in it in spite of the way the world looks to them, or might actually be. Yeah.
Right. Well, and then you throw in this pandemic, which has thrown like a wrench in everybody's life. and I can't imagine having to be a kid dealing with this. And I mean, maybe if it wasn't this, it'd be something else. Who knows? And I truly feel in the grand scheme of everything, this isn't going to be so bad. That, it was a year of our life, which is big, but hey, it was just a year of our life. And I don't know if that's, if I'm minimizing that too much, and I'm sorry if it sounds like I am. It makes me think about a mentor of mine I had in Texas who was a pastor who preached one Sunday on suffering. And she said, you know what, suffering is suffering. You can't compare it to other people's suffering because, we have it very, very nice here in the United States. And if we compare it to other people's suffering, she was saying that's really not fair. That when we're suffering, we should own it. We are suffering, and it is what it is. It doesn't need to be compared to anybody else's. So.
Totally. Yeah, and I've been thinking about this past year of our lives, especially now that we've come up on that 1 year mark, and it is weird and wild to think that it's only been a year, and I think realistically, in the grand scheme of things, a year isn't that much, and I think it's a year that is for me, hopefully has taught us a lot about our world, and not in a negative sense, but how, for me, it's inspired me to better look at how can I be there for the communities that I'm a part of? How can I, connect better with others? How can we take care of each other when things like this happen, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's, dealing with our young people, fear of climate change, in an ever-changing world. How can we be in community with each other and truly take care of one another? And I think to kind of tie this back into the conversations that we've been having too with our young people, I think they're tuned into that. I know when we've had a little bit more of the faith-based conversations, and why is church important to these youth? What role has it played? The message that I've gotten is it has taught them how to be there for each other, how to show up for one another, and how to take care of each other when stuff hits the fan and gets real. And whether that's come from, time at youth group, or I know Reagan, one of our more recent interviewees, talked about, church camp and the combo weekend retreats, and how those taught her more about community than in-person church ever really did. And it wasn't her saying that the four walls of the church were doing a bad job of building a community. It's just that it was different going to church camp or youth retreats and things like that. So so I think on that year of our lives in this pandemic, and what are we coming out? What are we taking from it? What's the other side going to look like? I think our young people have some idea of what that is. I hope that's kind of what I've gotten from our conversations.
Yes, they're very resilient, and I think this is sort of changing the subject a little. One thing I know we talked about, I believe in several podcasts, was cultural differences, and I don't know if you would agree. You grew up in Montana, Court, and I grew up in Texas, and since working for the conference and traveling and meeting youth in Montana, meeting youth in Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, there's this difference that I have noticed, and it's hard to explain. But I know in Montana there's a lot more darker days up there, and I think that really affects mental health and it affects our youth. And I had never realized that. I guess I was surprised by it, but at the same time I shouldn't have been surprised by it. I just didn't realize, compared to youth down in the southern region, they have a whole lot more sunlight, and the impact of that on our everyday lives, I really noticed it since I've been up here.
Yeah, that's entirely true. And I know, I think a few of our youth and young people have talked about this, if not on the podcast, outside of it, especially in Montana. When we were talking about what does it look like to have convo, that has always been the literal light in the dark, because it would take place over President's Day weekend. And so I know this year especially it was extra hard for all of our youth to not be able to have some sort of in-person weekend retreat, because Montana's so spread out too, right? So like a lot of our kids, if they're in smaller towns, and like doesn't matter like where in Montana, if they're just in smaller towns where it's like an hour to get to the next most populated area, a lot of them are isolated from their friends or some, I don't want to say all support systems, because a lot of them have really, really great families. But for some of our kids, I know that church camp and like convo were always like the place where they like sought like refuge and like reprieve from like whatever was going on in their lives. And so to be robbed of church camp and convo in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of like really, really dark winters, I know is hard for a lot of our kids. So for a lot of our youth, those youth retreats have been literal lights in the dark that have kept them going when it gets rough. And I know that like the church camp communities for them have been, just like that support system that's really helped out. Yeah. And I haven't had a chance to like meet all of our youth yet throughout the conference in the various states. Thanks COVID for that one too. But yeah, I am curious to just see those differences and see, how different we operate and do things state to state, because I do think those cultural differences are there regardless of where we're at. And I know inner city kids are going to be different than our like more rural and urban areas.
Yeah, I guess I just wouldn't have thought we'd be so different. And because we're just in the United States, but it really is. And I didn't realize how much of an impact the weather has on your mental health. I don't know. I grew up in a place where the weather was fair all year round. And I just, having been living in Wyoming and being cooped up inside because of the weather, just couldn't believe how difficult it was.
Yeah, I've seen a meme floating around that's like, you don't think seasonal depression is real until that first like real day of sun during like when spring starts to come around, and it's like you're an entirely different person. And I remember that this year too. Like we had like a really big like spring like sunny day here in Montana, and it was like anything was possible. Like suddenly like everything was fine. Like I felt great, and it was like, man, like why do I feel this excited? I'm like, oh, it's because it's been dark for the past however many months, and now you're getting real vitamin D. So taking a total different direction in our conversation, I think we could probably speak from experience from our own generation and time growing up, but I think each generation and the generation above it has myths and stereotypes and even stigma in a sense surrounding it. I don't know. I know millennials, speaking for a little bit of our generation, is seen as like lazy or entitled or whatever. Those would be some of the like myths and stereotypes that I would throw out there. And I'm curious, Amanda, for you in our conversation, and those are pretty extreme stereotypes. They don't need to be that necessarily, but I'm curious if in our conversations and our time doing this first season of the podcast, if you had any kind of internal like biases or stereotypes toward, this younger generation that we're talking to, Gen Z, that were challenged in our conversations at all.
That's a good question. I guess being a millennial, still feel pretty cool, but they kind of made me feel not as cool. I don't know if anyone would agree with me, or maybe a lot of people disagree. I kind of feel like millennials, we tend to be, I guess, more dreamers. We were taught to, pursue what makes you happy. And I think, we tend to see millennials not sticking with the same job. I know that was annoying to older generations. Like, why don't those millennials stick with the job? But if we're not happy, we're going to find something else to do. And I guess it seems like this new generation, Gen Z, is a lot more practical. They're a lot more with it. It just feels like, we've learned from you millennials, y'all. Y'all just don't know what y'all are doing, but we do. and I hope that they see that as a compliment. I'm complimenting them. It just really seems like they got it together. And I'm impressed by that. And I don't know, I think some of those same old stereotypes are there of well, we're not going to listen to them because what do they know? And we've been there. We're probably still there. So it's just, this is hard, and one day maybe I'll be this person, but I wish we could find a way for the older generations to be more ready to pass that torch on. They feel like they don't want to let go of the torch to pass it on. I don't know if it's because they're afraid of the younger generations messing things up, but I mean, ultimately it's the younger generation's world to inherit. So yeah, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so first, this popped in my head, there are studies out there that show millennials and Gen Z are like more likely to want to work in jobs that have meaning. So like that whole like hopping the job to job and like doing what makes you happy. The studies that have been put out there about like the generational things is that millennials and Gen Z want to work for companies and organizations and nonprofits and that make like an actual difference in the world. So I think that's backed up by our having big dreams and wanting to do good things for our world. So that popped in my head, and I just wanted to share that. And I definitely think Gen Z is a little bit more practical. And I think it's funny you brought that up because I know a few years ago, some friends and we were talking about how millennials are like considered the burnout generation. And I think there's a book about that or coming out about that, is how millennials became the burnout generation. And I remember my friends and I were hanging out and talking about it and how we just got tired of trying to like fight the good fight. And I think we still are, like, we're still out there. All generations are out there realistically. But we just got tired, and we see in Gen Z, like, this fire to just like not take anything from anybody, to just like be themselves, like do whatever. From an LGBTQ perspective, there's a few articles and like things out there that are leaning toward how Gen Z is probably going to like start really pushing away the binary, of like what gender stereotypes and things like that look like in which those have always been challenged, right? But Gen Z, I think, is really embracing that a little bit more than generations before them for a number of reasons. And I think for me too, the biggest thing that's come up in these conversations is when in like the church context, when we're talking about the youth and young people, there's this thought and this idea that they just don't care, or they don't want to go to church, or that religion isn't of interest to them. And so, there's always these conversations of how can we make our youth group more hip, more cool? How can we make our church more hip and cool and appeal to like these younger generations? And I'm not denying that, some people I think do want worship bands and more contemporary Christian music and things that appeal to them. But I don't think that that's everything that even like millennials, I think, would fall into that. But I don't think that's everything that people are looking for. And I think in conversation with our young people, especially on this podcast, what I've been hearing and been challenged on is that they do care and have big questions about God and spirituality and even like the church. But I think what they're seeking, and this is what I pulled from these conversations, is that they're seeking a place to ask those questions and not necessarily get the right answers, but get the answers and the theology that like is lived out in everyday life. So, it to me sounds like they don't want to go to a church that says, love everybody, like love your neighbor as yourself. But if you're LGBTQ, if you're a single mom, if you're Black, Indigenous, like person of color, if you're like whatever, like you're not actually like welcome here. And so I think for me, what's been challenged is that our youth and young people do have questions about the Bible. They do have questions about God and theology and spirituality, but they're not looking for I don't think they're looking for concrete answers. I could be wrong. Maybe they are. I think we all kind of are in our own way. But I think they're looking for a place to ask those questions, determine what that answer looks like for themselves, and then like live into a spiritual community that like walks the talk.
Yeah, I like the way you said that when questions are asked, we're not always looking for answers. And I know I feel that way. I like to ask a lot of questions, but I'm not always looking for an answer right away. I mean, I want to find that answer for myself, and I like that the way you put that. I think a lot of this, I think technology plays a role in some of this as well. I know I read a couple studies on technology and how it has impacted the younger generations in the sense of before, when you didn't have your phone where you could just Google something really quick to find the answer, you kind of just had to rely on what your teacher said or what your pastor said. The pastor said blah, 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 blah. Jesus is blah, blah, blah. And, you didn't question it because, hey, the pastor said that. But now it's like, I must see what other people think. And so we have technology at our fingertips now.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that plays a role too in like connection. So I think that they're definitely looking for like a place to ask questions. And I also think they're looking for like real authentic connections with other people because, social media is social media. Like I do think you can use it well and create authentic online community. I think it's challenging, but I know people who've done it and are capable of doing it. And I think when we have that kind of technology at our fingertips and thinking back to high school, and I don't think I had Facebook until I was a freshman in high school, maybe like later senior or something like that. But the impact that plays on kind of like our self-image and self-esteem and things, and thinking if that is at your access all of the time in your pocket. And I think, kids get cell phones at younger ages, which like, I'm not going to like state any opinion on, but they do. And I think, when we have people on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, regardless of whether their profile is public or private, hopefully private, internet safety, kids, for anyone who's listening to this, like don't talk to strangers on the internet. But like when your peers are liking or not liking your post or commenting or not commenting, or like, we open the door for so much more like cyberbullying, harassment, and like any other tool, it just needs to be used wisely. And so thinking about how relationships are being made and had, and conversations even are had on the internet, I think churches and youth groups and things like that have an opportunity to use those tools in a way that disrupts some of those conversations and things like that. So like being a beacon of positivity or like alternative thinking, whatever you want to call it. And I think they offer a place to create more authentic connections and relationships than they might be able to find online.
Yeah, I think about how we communicate now a lot. And do we even talk on the phone anymore? I feel like that's a thing of the past now. Or people have phone anxiety where they don't want to talk on the phone. I don't know if that's really a thing. I think it might be, but
It absolutely is a thing.
How silly is that, really? I guess it's not. But thinking about, do you remember, I don't know if you do, when it was so cool to have cool ringtones on your phone? Yeah, like
Do we still do that anymore?
I don't know when it happened. I saw a meme on this about, there was a day when we stopped, turning our phone on the volume up where you could hear the ringtone. And we don't know when that happened, but one day it happened. Because I don't know, it's such a weird thing to think about. I was so into the ringtones, and then one day I wasn't.
So, Amanda, as we're moving in to season 2, probably pick up again, maybe probably late summer again, since we started in August last year. We'll see if we do that again for this year. Where do you hope these conversations go and take us? Or what do you hope others and other generations are learning from these conversations?
Well, I hope for anybody listening that I hope that they will see the wisdom that we have seen in these conversations, and I hope maybe it can break down some walls, and maybe it will inspire folks to talk to young people in their church, because at the end of the day, we're all just people, and I guess I don't know why that wall is there between generations, and why we can't talk to each other. But I hope that this will provide some inspiration to knock down those walls, so we can just talk. And for me, it has opened my eyes to some things. It has made me think about some things I never would have thought about. And so I hope that's the same for folks. And likewise, if any youth are listening, I hope that they feel heard. I hope that they can feel that they're not the only ones, that that they've got friends out there that feel the same way. And I hope that they know that people care, and we're trying to be better. We're all trying to be better, to listen to each other, hold each other accountable, and to take care of each other. And I'm excited for the next season. I think we're gonna interview some more youth, maybe interview some young adults, get their take on life. So, what about you, Court? What are you hopeful for?
I don't think I could have said any of that better. So, I mean, all that, honestly. Yeah, I hope our young people listening feel heard. I hope they know that they have a voice, and that voice and their stories and their perspectives need to be told. They're worth being told. And yeah, I mean, like I said, you said it. I hope others listening in the church, older adults, whatever age you want to throw that at. I don't know. Some people say it's 35. Some people say it's 50. So I don't care. However you want to interpret older adults, those in positions of power in the church, I'll say that. I hope that they recognize and value the voice of young people, and take these conversations seriously and take their perspective seriously. Because I think because I've heard this from you, and this is where I get it, this isn't the next generation, they're the now generation. And if we want our churches to move forward with this generation, and I think it will, one way or another, but if we truly want our churches that exist in this present moment to still be alive in this current younger generation, we have to include them, and we have to take their voices and their perspectives seriously, because if we don't, they're going to leave, and they might start something else, and that's great. I'm all for starting something new if you need to. But in that, they could lose the value of working across generation and being in an intergenerational context, because I don't think we get that opportunity as much. So yeah, I hope that people take our youth and young people seriously and don't just brush them off to the side. Well, that's a great idea, kid, but this is the way that it's always been done. So we're just going to keep doing it.
the most dangerous saying.
It's true.
Well, I look forward to the next time.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to see what we're gonna stir up, what we're gonna make happen. And yeah, if you're listening and you're a young adult, youth, young person in the church or not in the church, have a bad experience, reach out. You can find our contact information on our podcast site. And yeah, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your voice. So thanks for listening. And I'm Court Von Linder.
And I'm Amanda Daniel.
And this is Mountain Sky Prophets.
Thanks for listening to the Mountain Sky Prophets. Mountain Sky Prophets is brought to you by Young People's Ministries and Next Gen and Inclusiveness Ministries of the Mountain Sky Conference of the United Methodist Church. You can find us at www.mtnskyumc.org. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure you tell your friends to listen in too.